Elijah Moore gets on for a bit in the first half, misses 2 shots on the same possession, gets his own miss, to be fair, and just goes away for the rest of the game. Ian Jackson, meanwhile, has the game of his life in his home state. And it's a lot of what the difference between these two programs are, the caliber of player that they can go get. Because while I think Elijah Moore is very talented, I think it's an objective statement to say that Elijah Moore is very talented. Ian Jackson is ready to go. Ready to go.
Ready to go. And I think the crazy thing is RJ Davis was the big name coming into this game. Top 10 in the ACC in scoring, dropped 22 and 19 on Syracuse last year. But he was held relatively quiet at 16 points, but it was a very quiet 16 points. He wasn't exploding to the basket. It kind of came on late with his 11 second half points. They held him to 5 points in the first half. But you look at with Ian Jackson, it just adds to another really strong performance from a guard. After Matthew Cleveland put up a career high 32 last time out, you have another player here in Ian Jackson who explodes against Syracuse, which has one of the worst defenses in the entire ACC.
Well, it almost never ends, right? You brought up Matthew Cleveland, who had himself a heck of a game in earlier this week, but it's been every guard that Syracuse has gone up against in its ACC slate. Chase Hunter of Clemson, Marcus Burton of Notre Dame, Chucky Hepburn of Louisville, all of them having great games against the Orange. Though the thing is, I think this time it was a little different. I think Ian Jackson took a lot of tough shots, and even in later game, talking about Jalen Withers, who really popped off towards the end, those two, there were some possessions where you could get into the zone and how effective it was in allowing Ian Jackson to get these shots that he just ended up burying. Not a lot of quality looks, which is strange to say in a game where Syracuse gave up nearly 90 points. It didn't feel like the guy who was really steering the ship for the opponent was getting stuff for free. At least there's some solace in that. Of course, it's not a win, but in a 6-point loss where you figure Ian Jackson's not going to have that game against you every time, maybe that makes it a little easier to live with?
I don't think it's that easy to live with. What do you guys think about the takeaway, or what's your takeaway from Ian Jackson's 23-point performance, 16 of which came in the first half? Call in 315-443-2011, or you can text us 315-556-3929. It's the double overtime with Alex Ramol and Skylar Wilkes here after UNC takes down SU 88-82. I want to go through the previous few games for Ian Jackson first, as we dive into this, Alex. In the last 2 games, he was 0 for his last 11 coming into today. In the last 8 games, he was 6 for 30 from 3. And suddenly, he makes 5 3-pointers in the game. He goes unconscious. And to me, I disagree with the thought, Alex. I thought almost all of the 3-pointers he made were open. It wasn't like a hand was in his face. He was open at the bat. Like, he was more open than Kyle Cuff was on that last shot of the game.
Yeah, and I'll say, I think some of them were a bit more difficulty. Maybe with moving feet, I can get tricked on some of those, seeing those go. They're not entirely like standstill, easy catch and shoots. But even in college, I don't think those exist too much. This is a guy who his career high was 5 threes and made 4 out of 5 in the first half. So clearly something was working. It's a case of Dr. Syracuse. Dr. Syracuse has been in this week because Miami, the worst team in the ACC, has a decent enough easy time with SU down at the Watsco Center in Coral Gables. And this time around, North Carolina, it's not a horrible season. It's not at like the low that Miami has hit. They're a bubble team technically, but it's not a good season by Tar Heel standards.
You talk about Dr. Syracuse. He makes so much money. That could be the NIL that Adrian Autry so desperately wants.
Yeah,
that's how much money.
Dr. Syracuse has a mansion on Skinny Atlas Lake.
Of course.
Raking it in because all the problems of Syracuse's opponents have been fixed recently, and that's what's happened here. North Carolina, it wasn't an easy win for North Carolina. Again, only 6 points, decently in control. It was a wire-to-wire win for the Tar Heels. SU never led at any point in the game, even though it felt kind of even at points. But UNC got to be UNC again, it felt like, in some ways.
And the Tar Heels, who averaged just over 7 3-pointers a game, made a season-high 13 tonight. That you have to go back to the season opener against Elon. to find out the last time that UNC made 13 3-pointers in a game.
UNC looked like Clemson, which is a weird sentence to say if you go back 5 years in college hoops.
Yeah.
But UNC looked like great three-point shooting team.
Now
like
you
the
have
Clemson
Syracuse and Elon on the same level defensively. I mean, Syracuse, what is so ridiculous, I talked about it, right? They're the second worst scoring defense in the entire country behind that gritty Miami in the ACC, behind that gritty Miami team that stormed them on Tuesday. And you just look, they kept flipping from 2-3 zone to the man defense, and you heard the host of Orange Overtime, Hudson Ridley, talk about how it did throw the Tar Heels off. They had back-to-back turnovers when Syracuse first flipped to that 2-3 zone, and then it just was never consistent from there.
Yeah, in the zone, it's pretty typical problem with the zone, but he talked about it. I didn't think the three-point looks were that easy, but the point is with the zone, you're giving up those quick shots from deep. They're not always the most open in the world, but if you have just a little bit of space, those threes are going to come, and they did for North Carolina. That was what's happened, but when you as the head coach, Adrian Autry, or even one of the assistant coaches on Syracuse, see a guy like Ian Jackson who's just nailing threes left and right, something's got to change. You can't keep having your team go out in that exact same look when a average to bad three-point shooter, I don't even know Ian Jackson's numbers, I know they're not that good, was out there looking like Stephen Curry just bombing them on you. Change the look.
Change the look. It's more of that lack of in-game adjustments from Adrian Autry. What would you guys have done to try to stop Ian Jackson and this three-point barrage, if you will, from the Tar Heels? Give us your thoughts at 315-443-2011, or you could text us, 315-556-3929. Of course, can't forget to interact on Twitter and YouTube at WAER Sports Talk. And I just don't understand when these players, like Jaquan Carlos, was supposedly this defensive maestro, and he comes in and just, sure, he's leading the team in steals, but he's not contributing defensively the way he's not a lockdown point guard the way you expected him to be.
Skylar, if you believed that, I got to ask next, did you buy a bunch of NFTs in 2020? Because, come on.
No, I just was in support of my guy Speedy Claxton over there at Hofstra.
Oh, sure. But Jaquan Carlos was never going to be this lockdown defender. He's undersized. He's not particularly athletic. And not everybody needs to be an all-world defender. And Jaquan Carlos certainly isn't. But even working within the zone, which should theoretically be easier because he's covering just a bit of the perimeter that just really needs to be his own, even in that kind of limited role, Jaquan Carlos never looks like an all-conference, even all-small conference defensive player.
And what's more concerning to me is down low, where UNC, if you watched our pregame video on our Twitter at WAER Sports Talk, Austin Barrett talked about the lack of size for North Carolina. They don't really have a true dominant big man. Well, you certainly wouldn't know by watching this game. Jalen Withers with 19 points, 7 for 10 from the field. He hasn't had that many points since 2022 when he was still at Louisville. There's no real interior presence. If Eddie Lampkin is not having a lights-out game defensively, which hasn't happened since, he still lived in Houston, then you have no one to defend the interior because Jair Davis, while I like the energy he brings, is not a defensive stalwart either. So you really don't have great defense down low. So if Jaquan Carlos and J.J. Starling aren't setting the tone in the backcourt, then you are absolutely lost defensively down low.
It's just not Eddie Lampkin's role. I mean, maybe Eddie Lampkin thinks that's Eddie Lampkin's role because he's the center for Syracuse. He wears Derek Coleman's 44 on his back, but it was never to be a strength of Jaquan Carlos, and I don't really think anybody was trying to sell that as hard as maybe Jaquan Carlos supporters were before the season. And the thing that makes the kind of performance for that Jalen Withers had even more discouraging for Syracuse, and of course he reined in some threes. He had 3. But I thought that if UNC was going to succeed on the interior, it was going to be a group effort. Listen, as much as I like Van Allen Lubin being an Orlando guy, he didn't really pose much of a threat. Jalen Washington didn't play that well on offense, only had 1 2-point field goal. splashed a 3 out of nowhere, which I can't really blame on anybody because that was just kind of
His second three-pointer of the year.
Just kind of an absurd look, so I can't really put too much on that. But, I mean, credit to Jalen Withers because he was crashing inside and making some pretty sick shots, and it just still wasn't the defensive performance that Eddie Lampkin could have had because these guys were taking outside shots. They were taking tough layups inside. So that should be more stoppable from the perspective of the interior defense for Syracuse. And Eddie Lampkin didn't take advantage of those tough shots that the UNC bigs were trying to pull.
Defense was definitely part of the, not second half collapse necessarily, but the second half struggles there where Syracuse was in the game and then seemingly out of it. And that's what Dave from Liverpool wants to talk about. Dave, another second half collapse there from Syracuse.
Syracuse basketball under Autry's definition of insanity. I called up last season when Syracuse won 20 games, and I believe they might have had like 14 losses, which is a lot of losses. But even last year's season, in many second halves, they'd give up at least 45 points in the second half, and of course they gave up more than that this time. And they were down by 2 with a minute to go, and Syracuse showed no poise at all in the last minute. Also, Syracuse every year, it's been going on for many years, even under Boeheim. The other team always makes more three-point shots than we do, and it's not even close.
So, Dave, you touched on a lot of things there. What do you think was the defining factor in this loss?
Well, obviously, we don't know how to play defense because you can't allow a team to make 13 three-point shots.
Yeah,
that's totally ridiculous. Nobody should make more than 7 or 8 three-point shots. When you get more than that, then you're not playing any defense at all.
And that's a lot with the zone. You mentioned, of course, that it was also in especially the latter years of Jim Boeheim where it just seemed like teams were having their way with Syracuse from outside the arc. And the funny thing is that Adrian Autry had kind of gone away from that, especially last season. And in the last month or so, he's been bringing back the zone, but the old problems with the zone have come back. So it really shouldn't be surprising that the three-point defense has struggled.
Why would a basketball player want to come to Syracuse if you're going to play zone? I wouldn't want to come to Syracuse and play zone.
It doesn't get you ready for the NBA, I'll tell you that. How many NBA teams are running the zone with any frequency these days?
Yeah, I'm just saying, and today it was very upsetting to see, Kadari Richmond's been playing pretty well. And, St. John's is having a great year so far. I wanted Syracuse to get Patino, but I'm sure he would never come here because he didn't even have to move out of his house. He just had to go from, New Rochelle to, Queens.
Yeah, Peter, you brought up a lot of great points. Thanks so much for calling in. If you want to follow Dave in his footsteps and call in, the number is 315-443-2011. We also have a text from Peter out in Los Angeles, going back to our conversation about the struggles from Jaquan Carlos in his first year at Syracuse. He says that he's not an ACC point guard, has no business logging those minutes, wants to know what Coach Autry's deal with him is and why does he stay with him for so long, mostly because of the egregious turnovers and, again, going back to that defensive possession at the end of the game where Ian Jackson blew right by him.
He was turned around at one point during that possession.
Literally.
We were watching the game and listening, and we saw Jaquan Carlos facing the basket when he was guarding the perimeter. Looked absolutely lost. Though, to be fair, the entire team kind of looked lost for that possession, which is absolutely not what Syracuse fans want to see or hear, because I'm sure it was communicated over the air by our good friend Ian Nicholas that it was a disjointed setup from a team that was playing to stay in the game, a last gasp, and one of the biggest moments of the entire season. That's not what should happen late in these games. So I'm not surprised that Syracuse fans like Peter are annoyed especially even focusing on Jaquan Carlos, who even when you're operating within the zone, Carlos, you said it earlier, Skylar, sets the tone. Because if the one-on-one matchup at the top doesn't work, it's hard to believe in what's going on down low.
Right. There's just a lot of concerns. This team all year, time in, time out, defense, there's just seemingly no fixing it. I don't know if it's a schematic thing at this point. It just seems like, or even really personnel. There's just, this team is so bad defensively that they make teams like North Carolina, who can't shoot the three ball, look like Steph Curry out there.
Yeah.
And for Syracuse, the three-point shot was not in the cards. They had a different offensive strategy, which we will talk about all that and more coming up after this break on the Double Overtime.
Nobody has to know you're mine.
This week on Mountain Stage, we welcome home West Virginia native John R. Miller. We'll also hear the bluegrassy side of Baltimore's Chris Jacobs, Nashville's Lindsay Liu, plus Jeffrey Martin and Margot Silker.
Hi, this is John R. Miller. Join us this week in live performance on Mountain Stage.
Sunday from noon to 2 on 88.3 FM WAER.
Start your Sunday mornings off right with Sunday Morning Gospel from 6 to 8 a.m. right here on WAER. Hosted by Cora Thomas, the program features some of the best local and national gospel artists. You'll hear everyone from Daryl Coley to the Brooklyn Tabernacle Choir to the Winans family. More information is available online at waer.org. Join us Sunday mornings from 6 to 8 a.m. for Sunday Morning Gospel on 88.3 FM WAER.
A new thriller set among feuding farmers in Ireland deals with some weighty issues. Masculinity, violence, and yeah, all those sheep.
They were difficult because, they don't really take direction. They kind of have their own method.
Director Christopher Andrews on his movie, Bring Them Down. Sunday on Weekend Edition from NPR News.
Sunday morning from 8 to 10 on WAER.
Welcome back to the Double Overtime on WAER. I'm Alex Ramol, joined by my good friend Skylar Wilkes across from me, talking about Syracuse men's basketball and its recent loss to UNC 82-88, the final in favor of the Tar Heels. And we talked a lot about the defense in our first portion of the show. Now moving on to the other side of the ball for the offense. And one of the big offensive strategies that stuck out for Adrian Autry and his crew was really attacking the paint early, which makes a lot of sense because we outlined it before the game. Our broadcasters, our host of the game, Hudson Ridley, and even us on Twitter at WAER Sports Talk before the game talked about how that would be such a huge part of the strategy for SU. So if you have anything to say about Syracuse and its early offensive strategy especially, you can call in at 315-443-2011 or text us at 315-556-3929. You can also talk to us at WAER Sports Talk on Twitter. And we've actually got a caller in, Doug from Syracuse, one of those callers that we mentioned before. He wants to talk about Elijah Moore's usage, somebody who didn't see the floor a lot in the second half of this game, or maybe at all.
Not at all.
What's going on, guys? So here's my thing on Elijah Moore. It makes absolutely no sense not to play the kid. Like, you start him every game for once they did put him in the starting lineup, and Autry said he's got to work on his defense. Nobody else is playing good defense. It's not like Cuff and Carlos are setting the world on fire defensively. So, like, for his development and his long-term progression, it makes zero sense not to play him, even if his defense isn't up to par. I mean, we're not winning these games. You would think that he could get some good minutes and develop and build some confidence, but he just sits him at the end of the bench. It's almost like he's opening the door to say, all right, kid, hit the transfer portal. It just doesn't make any sense to me.
Yeah, Doug, it's killing his confidence, and it makes no sense. He plays well even against Boston College, where he had that really strong start, and then he just barely plays the second half. I simply don't understand it. And you brought up a great point where defensively, you're basically not losing anything. This team is so bad defensively. What harm is it putting Elijah Moore out there?
Yeah, exactly. And then, like, my last thing, guys, is the offensive defensive substitutions at the end of the game. You know, like you guys mentioned earlier, Carlos gets absolutely smoked. I have no idea what he was thinking, pressuring the ball that far away from the three-point line. And then we just get the ball in, and we push it down in transition, and Cuff chucks up the three. He's doing offensive defensive substitutions with Carlos and Cuff, and then he doesn't call timeout. He lets the play progress, and we got Cuff, who hasn't made a three in I don't know how long, chucking up a corner three early in the shot clock, which that was the game right there.
Yeah, it was an absolutely terrible offensive possession to end the game. Thanks, Doug, for the call. Remember, if you want to join in, it's 315-443-2011. And Elijah Moore is a super interesting character on this Syracuse team, especially because this is not a tournament team. There's not really any reason to keep things solid. This is not a defense worth holding on to. As you said, there's nothing to protect. And when the guards on offense towards the end of the game, of course, there's J.J. Starling, who played every minute of the second half, which I have no issue with.
No.
I don't think any Syracuse fan on earth does. But when Lucas Taylor has 16 minutes, took one field goal that he made, and the other big minutes go to Jaquan Carlos, who was 1 for 4 in the second half, 17 minutes.
1 for 7 total, by the way.
1 for 7 total, but in the second half, offered nothing. So that's how you end up with those J.J. Starling hero ball possessions towards the end of the game that, listen, bless his heart, J.J. Starling's going to make those shots on the time because he's a really talented offensive player. He's a lead guard. There's only so many in the country. Even if he's not one of the top lead guards, he is one of them and a guy that you can trust to initiate instant offense. But Lucas Taylor and Jaquan Carlos giving you the juice? No, it's not going to happen. Elijah Moore exists on your roster, and while he's not a guarantee, he has a chance to make something out of nothing in a way that nobody on the roster even really does outside of JJ.
Kyle Cuff played 1 minute in the second half, and it was
what a minute it was.
It was to come in and huck up that shot, which I trust Elijah Moore shooting the basketball a lot more than I trust Kyle Cuff at this point.
Yeah.
Elijah Moore, I can't reiterate this enough. It's very Jim Boeheim-esque, the way he treated Benny Williams, where it's just like a young player has potential, and then he just destroys your confidence by... I don't think Adrian Autry is not yelling at Elijah Moore and necessarily mistreating him, but he's misplaying him in that way where even, again, going back to Boston College, where he's scoring the basketball and then never saw him again. It makes zero sense to, one, in the development of a player to treat him like that, and also in the grand scheme of things, you're trying to win games, and even if you're not winning games, which Syracuse is clearly not doing, defense, the biggest reason why. Who cares if Elijah Moore is out there for extra minutes? The gap defensively between him and Kyle Cuff is not that large where it's worth losing the offense there.
I don't really know if there is a gap that's
and there might not be. And also, Kyle Cuff is not the future of this team. He's almost out of eligibility at this point. He's a redshirt junior, which means he has, like, at most a year or two left of eligibility. Elijah Moore, the ceiling is so much higher that it really begs the question. It's head-scratching. It is head-scratching the way Adrian Autry has used his highly coveted freshman. He gets all this praise for recruiting these guys, and that doesn't even play them. Makes no sense.
If you keep scratching your head when thinking about the weird things that happen with this team, you'll start bleeding from the temple.
Yeah.
It's really been frustrating where Moore just seems to be one of those players that can be a spark plug, but he's not really allowed to at all.
And he's not allowed to make mistakes pretty much.
Yeah, and it's frustrating because Syracuse, another game where it didn't really utilize the bench that much. 4 points off the bench from SU in the second half, and Elijah Moore was a starter who didn't play. So that means that the guys off the bench were Jaquan Carlos, who I guess you could say was technically the starter. So you could say that that's 1 point off the bench.
He played more minutes than J.J. Starling.
He did. That is priorities out of whack. The one true bench point, because I'm calling Jaquan Carlos a starter, was from Peter Majstorovic. Chris Bell had 0. Kyle Cuff had 0. But really, with Kyle Cuff, I can't really blame him for taking that shot in a way now that I thought about it. I didn't really realize that he'd only played 1 minute in the second half. But if you think about it, Skylar, you're Kyle Cuff. You're being put in at the very end of the game for the first time in forever. You assume it's to go do something on offense. He's one of the better shooters on the team. So while he's not J.J. Starling, I can't really blame him. Like, Adrian Autry's putting him in there. He's got to be thinking, oh, well, this is my shot. I've been put in the game late. I got to do something because that's clearly what my coach wants me to do, whether he tells me or not. I'm the closer.
It's frustrating because that's really logical, Alex, but it just makes no sense. It's like, I don't care.
No.
Like, I used to have a coach that would say, play within the framework of your respective scheme. And at no point in time, in crunch time, it's like if he gets open on the wing, shoot the shot, Kyle. But at no point, I think, would anybody in college basketball, not Bill Self and not Adrian Autry, is drawing up a play for Kyle Cuff saying, all right, crunch time, late in the game, let's get this guy a shot. It's just, that's not what you're doing. That's not what he's out there to do. He's out there to make a shot if given the opportunity. It's not, all right, let's draw up this play to get J.J. Starling a shot, or Kyle Cuff a shot in crunch time.
Is play within the scope of your respective scheme the wordy Connecticut version of know your role?
I guess it is. I mean, it did come from lacrosse, coincidentally, but still, yes, I think it is kind of know your role. And Kyle Cuff, I think he's probably a little too confident in his abilities. And it was kind of like the Wake Forest game where Shorty scored a career high, but he also missed like 8 shots because he just kept shooting and shooting and shooting. And at that point, you have to know your role. I mean, we talk about how this team kept harping on going inside the paint early on. Ian Jackson made more three-pointers in this game than the entire Syracuse roster.
Guy who doesn't really take that many threes at all. At all.
Like, I don't understand that. I think that's as far as I could say. Is I just don't understand. That was such mismanagement at the end of the game. The offense is really the only thing I guess this team has going for it. I guess, if you want to say that it's a thing that's positive.
If you have any thoughts of what Syracuse has going for it, you can call in at 315-443-2011 or text us at 315-556-3929 on the double overtime, talking Syracuse and UNC men's basketball. But other than giving Elijah Moore some more minutes, which I think is a perfectly good solution by our caller Dave to maybe shake up this offense, where can Syracuse really go when it comes to changing things up? Because obviously J.J. Starling is going to get his shots, and I think that's perfectly fine. Eddie Lampkin has a decent amount of work down low. I don't really think he should be taking more layups, especially when it seems he can't even handle modest floaters sometimes.
That's the thing.
What's the thing that needs to change for this offense?
Well, I was going off your Eddie point is more consistency with him down low. There's a lot of times where he needs to make up his mind quicker, where maybe he gets he had a team high 3 turnovers today because I think sometimes he gets it, maybe he has a mismatch, but because he has that unselfish gene, he's looking to pass and he forces something, or he just doesn't necessarily realize that he can take advantage of the size mismatch, and so he either misses short or he just doesn't take the shot at all. He needs to understand his role. Going back to Kyle Cup, understand your role is either as a passer or as an interior finisher, and trying not to get those mixed up, and he gets those mixed up way too often.
Yeah, I just don't know where the big offensive pops are going to come from if Kyle Cuff, Chris Bell, and Elijah Moore are not firing the right way. Like, those I feel like are the guys, maybe not so much Kyle Cuff, but at least he's a shooter. Those are the guys who should be your most talented shooters outside of J.J. Starling. And it seems like none of them really know what to do on offense at any given. None of those guys fit in their role, which is most frustrating with Chris Bell, whose role should be the most easily defined in college basketball, which is basically take all the threes for Syracuse, but he doesn't get open. He doesn't make anything for himself. He's not active enough on the floor at all.
I have never seen, actually, maybe I have seen it. Not that I can remember, an inability to create your own shot. It's unbelievable. There was a play today where he was coming around a screen trying to force a rush covered off balance three, and he gets pickpocketed and it turns into easy points for North Carolina. He just simply, the players that are supposed to be scorers on this team outside of Starling and Lampkin basically just almost don't know what to do. The inconsistency is mind-blowing, Alex. Imagine if Chris Bell played at the level that was expected of him.
Or that he has played at before.
Exactly.
We've seen it.
We've seen it. It's just unbelievable to think that he is capable of those things and hasn't showcased them once in a blue moon, maybe. It's not sustainable to have that level of inconsistency that Syracuse offense has shown so consistently. It's like they're consistently inconsistent.
Yeah, that's definitely true. One of the few guys that I think really understands what he's about on offense is Jair Davis. Took 8 shots today, only had 9 points. Not a horrible game on offense from Jair in the slightest, but Jair's one where he seems like if he gets those little turnaround jumpers to fall, the offense is so much more open because the team has to respect seeing Jair Davis on the elbow, which is really dangerous. And I don't think that a lot of teams in the ACC have big forwards who can be serious mid-range threats like that.
I really like what he brings to the table offensively. He didn't really play. He only played 15 minutes total throughout the entire game. Played 4 second-half minutes. And he hasn't found that three-point shot yet, which I think is part of the problem. I mean, he made one today, but you could see so many times where he was just almost scared to shoot. He had an open look and just didn't want to shoot it. And if he can really pick up the slack, like there are pieces on this offense that can score, and like I said, they're just too consistently inconsistent.
Not a lot of things to like from the Syracuse offense today. Despite putting up over 80 points, Jair Davis was one of them. So we'll end on a positive as we move on to our next break. You're listening to the Double Overtime on WAER. When we come back, our reporter Austin Barrick in studio.
Nobody has to know your mind.
This week on Mountain Stage, we welcome home West Virginia native John R. Miller. We'll also hear the bluegrassy side of Baltimore's Chris Jacobs, Nashville's Lindsay Liu, plus Jeffrey Martin and Margot Silker.
Hi, this is John R. Miller. Join us this week in live performance on Mountain Stage.
Sunday from noon to 2 on 88.3 FM WAER.
Start your Sunday mornings off right with Sunday Morning Gospel from 6 to 8 a.m. right here on WAER. Hosted by Cora Thomas, the program features some of the best local and national gospel artists. You'll hear everyone from Daryl Coley to the Brooklyn Tabernacle Choir to the Winans family. More information is available online at waer.org. Join us Sunday mornings from 6 to 8 a.m. for Sunday Morning Gospel on 88.3 FM WAER.
We know you've got a lot to do in a day, and sometimes it may not be easy to tune in at exactly the right time to catch WAER News. But WAER News is always available, wherever and whenever you are, without a paywall. Visit our website to use our live stream or catch up on local and national news, as well as podcasts on our website at waer.org.
There is a one-stop listen for everything Syracuse athletics.
You got great talent on this offense. Like, you can't go dormant for an entire quarter. And
the Ostrom Avenue podcast provides unique opinions, plus exciting interviews from industry experts.
Joined by Georgia Tech play-by-play broadcaster Andy Demetra, Syracuse.com, football beat reporter Emily Laker.
Check out weekly interviews on YouTube and listen at waer.org or wherever you get your podcast.
Swing it near side corner. Jackson pumps the three. Sidesteps, now launches. Yes, sir. Ian Jackson drills the three inside the dome.
There was a lot of that happening. Ian Jackson hit 5 threes to tie his career high. helping North Carolina take down Syracuse 88-82. Welcome back into the double overtime. With Alex Ramol, I'm Skylar Wilkes, and we're joined by our reporter, Austin Barrick, who was in the Dome to watch this interesting game go down. If you want to get Austin's thoughts, he is a ball knower for sure, so call in 315-443-2011 or text us 315-556-3929. Austin, there's a lot of things that we could talk about, a lot of stuff that went down in this game. I think where we could start overall is just the second half, really, where Syracuse was down, clawed back into it, and let it slip through their fingertips.
Right. They scored 48 points in the second half. I was like, oh, wow, that's a pretty good mark. And there were a couple times where the game looked over, and there was a reporter who asked Hubert Davis, the head coach for Carolina, what did you think about Syracuse coming back not once but twice? And he's like, obviously didn't like that, and they have struggled with that all year, the Tar Heels have. And I think a lot of that had to do with JJ putting the team on his back. There was a few layups that he had that were just heroic stuff, and it's stuff we've seen a lot from him this season. You talk about the steal that he had off of the press when Carlos missed the layup. Carolina passed it to JJ, and he got it, and he had the N1. Another one where he had the deceleration Euro step. He's been so good this season finishing on the left side of the hoop with the right hand. And so he did a lot of that, but besides him and Lampkin, and we'll talk Lampkin later, there wasn't much else. And another thing that Autry harped on post-game, and this reminded me of the Pittsburgh game when Eddie Lampkin had 23 rebounds. And yet, despite winning the rebounding battle against Pittsburgh and winning the rebounding battle tonight against Carolina, Adrian Autry continued to say, we didn't get the rebounds late, and the rebounding was one of the reasons why we lost the game. And so you can do all you want throughout the first 36, 38 minutes of the game, but in Adrian Autry's eyes, if you don't get those last few rebounds, that was the difference.
It feels like once a shot from Syracuse, or a shot from Syracuse's opponent, pops out near the free throw line, it's almost like a 70% chance that SU's opponent gets the offensive rebound.
Wow.
And that's obviously not something that's very sustainable. But I think that could be partially with Eddie Lampkin. He's not exactly fleet of foot, not the guy to race out or jump up high to grab those long rebounds.
Majstorovic had one today where he just didn't gobble it up. It led directly to a UNC miss, but Majstorovic has been prone to that sometimes this season as opposed to Jair Davis, who didn't play a lot. And Autry said postgame he just liked what Majstorovic gave as opposed to Davis defensively.
And I think that Majstorovic gives a lot to this team that a lot of other players can't. But the strength of Jair Davis, I think, was missing down the stretch. And that's part of the reason why things felt a bit loose for SU at the end, because Jair's not exactly slow. I mean, he's not a burner, but he can move around, and he's a very strong guy.
He does underratedly very strong underneath. Like, he can rip it away from the opposing player.
Just has a solid frame, but it wasn't really showcased at the end because
he wasn't on the court.
He wasn't out there.
No.
And that felt like the thing that Syracuse was missing down the stretch. Another guy other than Lampkin who could be trusted to grab the ball at the end.
To me, and to try to read what Autry's mindset is, well, he said, Majstorovic gave him a better look than Davis, is when Syracuse is trailing in these games, Majstorovic can play, I guess, more of an up-tempo in that short roller kind of position that Davis doesn't do as well. Davis, as we know, is a methodical bully ball, back-to-the-basket driver. He doesn't have the finesse that Majstorovic has in the passing game. And, oftentimes here this season, they're now 11-15. They are typically losing down the stretch. So Majstorovic is in some of these crunch time moments. And I thought Majstorovic, for the most part, played well today. But against Withers, Withers had a career day, and he got poked in the eye yesterday in practice, and, they thought he might not go today. But I thought Davis did pretty well against Withers, but given the flow of the game, I'm not going to argue against Autry for playing Majstorovic down the stretch.
lot of lineup talk that could be had here on the double overtime after Syracuse falls to North Carolina 88-82. Skylar Wilkes here with Austin Ramol and our reporter Austin Barrick. Alex Ramol and our reporter Austin Barrick. 2 A's can be confusing at times. If you want to join in on the conversation, call us 315-443-2011. Interact with us on social media at WAER Sports Talk. And Austin, when you look at the lineup going down the stretch there, like Kyle Cuff checks in for a singular minute in the second half and hucks up that shot at the end of the game. It's like, obviously that shot was frustrating to watch, especially because he missed it. What would your ideal lineup there be in crunch time for Syracuse?
I would go, good question, Skylar. I would go JJ and Eddie, Majstorovic. I like Taylor. Did I say Majstorovic?
Yes. Yeah.
So JJ, Lucas Taylor, Majstorovic, Lampkin, and see, this is where it's tough because I only really trust those 4 guys right now.
I'd like it to be more obvious. And one of those guys is Peter Majstorovic, who's not exactly the most proven guy in the world, and the other is
tough.
Lucas Taylor, who's a non-factor on offense half the time.
You're rolling the dice on one of these dudes every game. You have, to me, on offense, it's 2 guys you can trust every game, and then it's everybody else. And it was so apparent today. There was a sequence where, JJ and Eddie were awesome today, but JJ had a layup, and then it was, I think it was 79-73 with 3 minutes to go. He had just made a shot, and he kicks it out to Majstorovic, who notably can't shoot threes. And he hands off to Jaquan Carlos, who also notably can't shoot threes. So therefore, JJ has to curl off another screen, get the ball back, dribble it out, go back in, and he gets a shot deflected or something. The amount of energy that this offense requires JJ to use because he doesn't have enough shooters around is underrated. And a big part of I'm going to remember this season in part, one, how disappointing it was, but from an individual level, I have more appreciation for Starling because of the lack of guys who can help him out on offense.
We were really surprised that Elijah Moore, who didn't do a whole lot today, mostly because he wasn't given a chance.
I heard that call from Doug. He was not happy.
But he was right. He's totally right. Elijah Moore, against Boston College, right? He puts up, 11 points and then barely sees the floor in the second half. And you talk about J.J. Starling not having shooters. Moore hasn't been super consistent, but that's a shooter.
He is. My Elijah Moore stance is, I don't know. I am never going to be pleading with people, please play Elijah Moore more. I'm not that guy because I don't think he offers the dynamic play and the size because all these guards are small too. That's a major flaw with the roster construction of this team. UNC is notably small, but when you got Cuff and Carlos out there, those guys, even UNC made those guys look small. More just so often it's 0 points on 0 of 3 shooting. And he's not rebounding. It's to a lesser degree. It's freshman year Chris Bell with Jim Boeheim. Boeheim would start him and then take him out, and he would barely see the court again. And on my walk back over here tonight, I was listening to that conversation with Doug. I thought, man, one of the weirder things that we will see this season is Elijah Moore scoring 22 points at then number 1 Tennessee. And then having all of these DNP coaches' decisions in the second half of these games. And Autry, yet again, he was asked, hey, what happened to Moore? Injured? Nope, didn't play him. My call. But I don't.
That's all they said was my call.
Yeah. It was a short answer.
Objectively his call.
He seemed a little upset that the question was even asked. But
so is it objectively his fault that they're losing?
Yeah, it'd be the same thing.
I don't think Elijah Moore is the answer to winning games either.
Oh, no. But at this point, like we were talking about, it can't hurt. I mean, you're putting Kyle Cuff in there. You're letting Jaquan Carlos play so many minutes. I mean, he is offensively inept for the most part. Yeah, sure.
Which player?
Jaquan Carlos.
Yeah, for the most part today, I liked his passing today a lot. He finished with 7 assists.
Good most
He's
of
just
the time.
so like the lack of size is brutal for him because he can never finish.
But also, when you don't have that many dynamic scorers on the roster, your passing doesn't really do a whole lot because it's like
it's
what are you passing to?
It's a lot of
Right.
absent-minded passing on the perimeter. And Austin, I love that you brought up the fact that these SU guards are small and don't really have the physical presence, because this is a team that, we could watch growing up and see Michael Benajay and Michael Carter-Williams.
Oh,
who
Benajay,
are
what a
big
baller.
guards who just impose their will. And I'm even forgetting more. I'm sure I could go back and just add on just 6'5" plus guards that
Elijah
Jim Boeheim
Hughes
would roll out, exactly, especially guys with point guard skills like Benajay and MCW, who could just really be a factor. And even guys like Elliot Cadeau, or who's not exactly super tall.
He's small.
He's only 6'1", but I feel like he's got just a little bit more of an edge to him.
Sure.
Am I out of bounds saying that?
Well, he's more talented too.
He's certainly more talented.
He also likes to turn the ball over, but
so even if the talent isn't there, you can't grab blue chippers like Cadeau. Having these bigger guards that can actually hold up when they penetrate is such a big thing that's missing from Syracuse basketball over the last 5 years.
It's true. That's an interesting systemic point that you raise, Alex. I don't know why. JJ, he's got good size. Mintz last year at the point guard position felt like an adequately sized player. Now, obviously, his playing style was not great, but for some games this season, you would die to have another scoring option like Mintz out there. Quadir Copeland, that's the guy. If you kept him at 6'6" with all those skills, here we go. Yeah, every conversation goes back to Quadir Copeland.
I'm surprised you didn't bring up Malik Brown.
Well, everyone knows my thoughts about Malik Brown.
Yeah.
I love that guy, but it's this team. This team, when it rolls out the Carlos and Cuff, and then when it's like more, it's like you're just really asking to get buried down there.
It's like the two team's top scoring options. You have J.J. Starling, who is an inconsistent three-point shooter, and then you have Eddie Lampkin, who is like a immobile, old-school center.
I would like to say this piece about Eddie Lampkin. I was so impressed with him today, really, and the way he moved in that Miami game on Tuesday, dunking, finishing with authority, running well. Today, he was running well. I believe he has played himself into shape. Now, too little, too late. And as Autry said, he was working through some things mid-season. Remember, he was injured after that first Brooklyn stint. Heading into that Cornell game, there was some weird stuff going on with Lampkin, injury-wise. But he was well-conditioned. He was highly spirited. I wrote down in my notes when Majstorovic had the pass to Lampkin for the dunk, and again, he was dunking really well today. In another universe, that could be an awesome buddy cop movie, Majstorovic and Lampkin, and those two guys, wow. But I thought he was awesome. He finished today with a career high with 26 points, 11 rebounds as well. It was a concerted effort to get him going down low against the smaller front court players like Lubin. The length of Washington gave him a little bit of trouble early on, but he figured him out as well with a touch shot, the teardrop over him from 5 to 7 feet out. Lampkin played an awesome game. He was a vocal leader. He was moving really well. This was a great Eddie Lampkin game. Too little, too late. It's going to go lost in the sauce when all this is said and done. But I thought Lampkin has been moving well recently, and today especially.
Eddie Lampkin, a veteran on this roster in his lone year in the Salt City. But looking ahead to the future here in Syracuse, we got a text from Ron who wants to talk about next year's recruiting class and with Sadiq White and Kyan Anthony, and Ron says that he wouldn't blame them if either one of them or both of them decommitted from Syracuse given the shape of the program.
Look, I'm no 4-star recruit out of high school, so I can't really speak on that part of it. I guess I wouldn't fault them. I'm a believer if you commit to somebody, you should probably stick it out for at least 1 year. If Kyan decommits, that's a monumental, devastating thing.
I think an important thing to note is both of them have signed their national letters of intent. So it would take a real extenuating circumstance to allow them to be released.
Also, I don't think either of those guys were expecting Syracuse to be some world-beating team this year. I think a lot of it is about them.
No, but I think anytime you look at this, what has gone on this year, and you lose to Miami, I think that is dishearteting.
And you're uncompetitive against a lot of good teams,
right?
Too.
Which is bizarre because if you go back, uncompetitive in the ACC, but Texas Tech, like those games were competitive.
But those games
were, but
they're also in the past.
You
could say the team slipped and doesn't have that anymore. What happens if the Longhorns, or especially the Red Raiders, came into even the Dome tomorrow?
This team got 30-pieced by Duke 10 days ago. They got 30-pieced by Maryland on December 21st. They got killed by Clemson on the road. The final score of that game was not as close as it was when you watch the game. This team is bad. But those, Anthony and White, I can't wait to see them next year, and they will be here. I don't want to hear it from the decommitment talk. Just let those. They're going to be here. The bigger question is, does Red stick around after next year? Because that's his prove-it year. We all know this.
Yep.
But it was disappointing to hear again from Autry. No moral victories. He's disappointed. The guys are disappointed. It's on to practice. Ready for the next opponent. Right. We've heard these phrases all season long, but
it's better than the alternative, Austin. There are coaches out there that are like, well, what do you mean? We took a great North Carolina team
sure,
to 6 points.
Yeah, that's
even if it was in our own barn. This is a rebuilding year. That's one of my favorite things about Coach Autry is that he doesn't seem to be like, oh well, it's just not where we are right now. I think Coach Autry expects to win every game, or expects to compete in every game. Maybe not expect to win, but when a team like Duke comes into the Dome and absolutely smashes the Cuse, he's disappointed and reacting as such, which I think is it's obviously again not something that Syracuse fans will take a whole lot of solace in because they'd rather their coach just win a bunch of ball games, but at least the right attitude is there to where I don't think Syracuse fans can get too angry at Coach Autry when there's a good year coming up in year 3. Year 3 has a lot of hope attached to it.
Yeah, but you don't know if it's a good year.
No, it's not a good year, but it's a year that has a lot of hope in there. And I think that is when the evaluations of what is this guy as a coach can really be made.
I do think, I know I got to go soon, but with Autry, at least he does deeply care. He wears his emotions on his sleeve. But one of the themes of this season is that the messaging does not get through the guys. So many times I have seen him say, with disappointment, we talked about X, Y, and Z, and the players did not execute X, Y, and Z. In his opening statement today, he said not to single out Kyle Cuff, but we didn't want him taking that shot.
Okay, so at least he's doing something right there.
There's always something that we talked about rebounding. The guys didn't get rebounds, right? There's always stuff that happens through the course of a game where he's bringing it up to the media. Well, the coaches did our jobs. The players just didn't execute. And that's the part that next year will either really rear its ugly head or it'll be fixed, and time will tell.
Well, we know our reporter Austin Barrick definitely did his job tonight. Austin, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you, guys.
Not quite done yet here with the double overtime. Still to come, we've got a game to play. It's our 10 for 10. You won't want to miss it right here on WAER.
There is a one-stop listen for everything Syracuse athletics.
You got great talent on this offense. You can't go dormant for an entire quarter. And
the Ostrom Avenue podcast provides unique opinions, plus exciting interviews from industry experts.
Joined by Georgia Tech play-by-play broadcaster Andy Demetra, Syracuse.com, football beat reporter Emily Laker.
Check out weekly interviews on YouTube and listen at WAER.org or wherever you get your podcasts.
If the government was not going to look at these numbers, we were going to answer the question, how many people died in Puerto Rico?
This is how the news should sound. The biggest stories of our time, powered by the journalists of the New York Times. I'm Michael Barbaro. This is The Daily.
Weeknights at 6:30 on 88.3 WAER.
A new thriller set among feuding farmers in Ireland deals with some weighty issues. Masculinity, violence, and all those sheep.
They were difficult because, they don't really take direction. They kind of have their own method.
Director Christopher Andrews on his movie Bring Them Down. Sunday on Weekend Edition from NPR News.
Sunday morning from 8 to 10 on WAER.
10 questions.
So to quote Jim Boeheim, can Syracuse press a pair of pants?
In 10 minutes.
Gotta go quick here.
It's time for 10 for 10 right here on the Double Overtime on WAER.
Welcome back to the Double Overtime. I'm your host, Alex Ramol, joined by Skylar Wilkes right across from me. You heard it there. We're playing the 10 for 10, a little game where we have 10 questions, statements, thought starters, and we have 10 minutes to answer them. Our producer, Jared, is going to come in over the air, space, or however sound works. I still haven't quite figured it out, despite my time in radio, to give us these prompts, and we'll do our best to answer them. Jared, what do you got for us?
Let's just jump right into it, guys. You can add any one player from another ACC team, not named Cooper Flagg. Alex, Skylar, who are you adding and why?
I'll let you go first, Alex, because I got to think.
Ooh, just right off rip, someone who's coming to mind, I would say Elliot Cadeau. Elliot Cadeau could be one. A strong point guard, somebody to absorb those Jaquan Carlos minutes that we've kind of lamented throughout the season. A solid point guard who's a passer first, I'd say. He's not a perfect player, and I probably would come up with a better answer with more time, but looking at the Tar Heels, Elliot Cadeau seems like a fit.
My first thought was Maxime Reynaud from Stanford.
Ooh.
But I thought because
That's
of
kind
Eddie
of a Lampkin
Lampkin,
role, yeah.
right, so it wouldn't necessarily fit. So I'll go with another former Pac-12 school, Andrei Stojakovic from Cal, because he isn't necessarily a ball-dominant guard. He can kind of play that 2 or 3 spot, and he can still score with the best of them. So you have kind of two guys that are both really dominant scorers in Starling and Stojakovic. I think it would make for a really dynamic scoring duo.
Great options, guys. Next, we're going to a true or false. 20 years ago today, Syracuse and North Carolina were both ranked top 5 in the nation. Is that true or false?
That's true.
In 2005.
That's basketball heritage, baby. I'm in.
I want to go with false.
Jim and Roy.
Skylar, you're right. UNC was number 4 and SU number 9.
Oh, my bad.
All right, next question. Down by 2, who is Syracuse's best option at the free throw line?
Ooh.
Oh. I'm sending JJ Starling up there. He was 10 for 10 today. 10 for 10 on the 10 for 10.
Definitely a valid option there. But because you took him, I'm going to go in a different direction and say...
There's not a lot of
there really aren't a lot of options.
You can join me on the JJ band.
I'm going to go with Elijah Moore.
Yeah.
Because he's a shooter, and even though he's a freshman and doesn't necessarily have that experience in late game situations, I trust his shooting ability to make free throws in clutch situations.
Maybe on the double overtime 2 years from now, that'll be a clear answer.
Exactly.
Syracuse fans better hope
Of course.
That. 10 for 10 on the 10 for 10. I love that, guys. Next, 7 Syracuse players got minutes in last year's home win over North Carolina, that famous upset win that everyone talked about last year. Work together to name those players.
From last year, 7 players.
7 players.
So we know Starling.
JJ, yeah.
Mintz.
Quadier?
Yes. So Starling, Mintz, Copeland, Brown. Then you've got, who else transferred out of here? We're at 4. We need 3 more. Who is... You've got... We talked about Brown.
Yes, about Brown. No way it was the boy Naheem McLeod.
Was it Naheem McLeod, Jared?
It was not Naheem McLeod. It was Mintz,
Brass.
Starling, Bell, Malik Brown, Justin Taylor, Cordier Copeland, and Munir Hima.
Okay, so Hima.
It really was.
It was all the transfers, and Munir Hima, who's also a transfer as well. Shout
I
out
forgot
Howard.
Justin Taylor
Yes.
existed, really. Which
Playing for former Morehead State head coach Preston Spradlin at
yes,
JMU.
Huge topic of conversation in our lives.
Yes. Continue, Jared.
All right, let's have some fun with this one. Make a Frankenstein-like player using aspects from just Syracuse players. For example, J.J. Starling's three-point shooting, Eddie Lampkin's cardio, whatever you guys want. 5 categories I'll give you. Shooting, athleticism, basketball IQ, their body build, their frame, and defense.
That's too many for me to remember, so we're going to freestyle this. Frame, I'm going Jair Davis.
Yes.
I want my player built like Jair Davis.
Yeah.
Shooting, Chris Bell.
On a
from
good
3.
day?
On a good day. I mean, J.J. Starling's shot creation.
Shot creation, sure, but shooting ability, I'd say, is probably.
It's probably.
I'm gonna go with Elijah Moore again.
Sure, yeah, that's our guy, I guess. This episode of
then
Double Overtime.
Frame, shooting, and then you've got size. I guess is frame as well.
Yeah. Passing and
passing
vision.
is Eddie Lampkin.
I would say like passing is Jake Juan Carlos, but vision is Eddie Lampkin. Like the eyes of Eddie Lampkin.
Yeah, I think Eddie Lampkin, and IQ is.
I would probably just want maybe not IQ, but like kind of heart of a basketball player, J.J. Starling.
Sure,
like
I was gonna say IQ or like intangibles. Majstorovic plays very smart, like a European.
I love that
player.
he gets punched every game. He's just a tough guy out there. He's
Sure.
starting stuff.
So I think our consensus
Grit
is
of
Starling,
Starling.
Lampkin, Bell/Moore, and
A little bit
Davis.
from everybody.
All right, Jared.
Syracuse and North Carolina both lost legendary coaches in recent years. What was Jim Boeheim's record against Roy Williams?
How many games did they play? How many games did they play against each other, Jared? Do we know?
He's doing the mental math.
17.
17. I would say Boeheim won 7 of those.
I would say Boeheim won.
You were close, Alex. 6 and 11. 6 wins, 11 losses.
All right, what's coming up next, Jared?
What is the most points scored by a Syracuse player against UNC? Who was it and when?
The most points ever scored against UNC for a Syracuse player. Why is my guy Tyus Battle coming to mind? I'm going to say Tyus Battle is my guess, with probably around 30 points.
I want to say Elijah Moore with 35.
Okay.
Scholar, you were close. It was 36 by Cole Swider on February 28th, 2022.
And I said Elijah Moore and then Elijah Hughes.
Yeah, yes, Elijah Moore.
Yeah.
He's all on our brains. All right, Jared, what's next up on the 10
All right,
for 10?
UNC made the NCAA tournament every year from 1975 through 2001. That's 27 straight appearances. What is Syracuse's longest streak of consecutive tournament appearances?
My gosh, I feel like it's got to be in that neighborhood.
What? So it's 21 for North Carolina?
Yeah, I'd say it'd be high teens for Syracuse.
Yeah, I'd say. Or it could be more because, well, no, I'd say 17.
17. Yeah, that's my birthday. Let's do that. 17.
It was only 10. Syracuse
Wow.
made it 10 straight years from 1983 to 1992.
Impressive era to make it in.
Yeah.
All right, we're going to have some more fun again. You can add 3 inches of height to any SU player. Who would you add it to and why?
I mean, I guess the non-fun answer is Jake Juan Carlos,
Yeah.
just to like add what could be a stronger rotation
But
player.
you'll say Jake Juan Carlos. I'll say Jair Davis because he is undersized, even though he
Yeah.
doesn't play like it. He's only 6'7". So if you add like him, make him 6'10" with his athleticism, I think that could be a fun player.
Yeah.
All right, last but not least, you guys are both Yankees fans. Who on Syracuse would fare best on a baseball diamond and why?
Oh my gosh. I would have to say, I mean, I just think J.J. Starling can do anything. I want that guy batting like second for me.
You know, I'm going back to the well here, sticking with, you know, we're talking about the Bronx. I got to
You're
go
right.
with Elijah
Oh
Moore,
my God.
the BX native. You know, he isn't a good athlete, and I like his hand-and-eye coordination somewhere in the hot corner maybe.
Yeah, listen, even if I don't think any of these guys could be really good baseball
No.
players because it's a tough sport that's hard to pick up, but at least you get a guy with the spirit of the Bronx on your
Exactly,
squad.
and that goes a long way.
Well, that's all we got for our prompts on the 10 for 10. Having a little fun. We're going to take a short break here on the Double Overtime to get into our final thoughts from Syracuse and North Carolina. We'll be right back.
If the government was not going to look at these numbers, we were going to answer the question, how many people died in Puerto Rico?
This is how the news should sound. The biggest stories of our time, powered by the journalists of the New York Times. I'm Michael Barbaro. This is The Daily.
Weeknights at 6:30 on 88.3 WAER.
Nobody has to know your mind.
This week on Mountain Stage, we welcome home West Virginia native John R. Miller. We'll also hear the bluegrassy side of Baltimore's Chris Jacobs, Nashville's Lindsay Liu, plus Jeffrey Martin and Margot Silker.
Hi, this is John R. Miller. Join us this week in live performance on Mountain Stage.
Sunday from noon to 2 on 88.3 FM WAER.
We know you've got a lot to do in a day, and sometimes it may not be easy to tune in at exactly the right time to catch WAER News. But WAER News is always available, wherever and whenever you are, without a paywall. Visit our website to use our live stream or catch up on local and national news, as well as podcasts on our website at WAER.org.
Cadeau, alley-oop at the three-point line, and Lubin throws it down. Elliot Cadeau's second time is a beauty to then Allen Lubin.
Wrapping things up on the Double Overtime. Only about 9 more minutes left here with you on WAER. Alex Ramol across from me. I'm Skylar Wilkes. Happy to have you with us. Breaking down this 88-82 loss for Syracuse at the hands of North Carolina. And it's gotten to that point in the show, Alex, where we get into our final words here, our final thoughts, if you will. But before we do, just want to quickly talk about the possibility of Syracuse finishing below 500 on the year. The Orange now, 11-16, and have only finished under 500 one other time in the previous, I think, half century, and that was just a few years ago under Jim Boeheim. This team would need to win out the rest of the way to avoid that fate.
Yeah, it's absolutely tough for Syracuse. Not really the place that SU should be. I'm absolutely with you on that. But for my final bit of thoughts about this Syracuse performance today, I was inspired by the performance of one Peter Majstorovic. Not the most productive day in the world for the Serbian. We'll see how he did right here. Just 7 points, 4 rebounds, 1 assist, a couple fouls in there. But Peter Majstorovic is the type of player that as this season winds down, Syracuse is 11-15. It's not a good season. This team might just barely make the ACC tournament. The NCAA tournament hasn't been a thought since November. Hasn't been a thought since before the snow came around Syracuse. Why not give more opportunities to guys like Peter Majstorovic? And that was props to head coach Adrian Autry, because today Peter got 25 minutes. I don't know if this was exactly the situation where he should have got a ton of minutes. Probably would have switched him around with Jair Davis, him playing a little bit more in the close versus Peter playing more in the meat of the game. But this season is kind of over. We're moving on to the next season of Syracuse basketball. And those guys like Peter Majstorovic and Elijah Moore, those are the guys who are going to support players such as Kiyan Anthony, Sadiq White, the team that is really a big deal for Adrian Autry. So the older players have been great, but I think it's time to cede to the youth movement for the health of this program in the future.
I am also a fan of Peter Majstorovic. I think he brings a lot to the team. The numbers aren't going to jump off the page at you, but he just fits this team and plays sound basketball a lot of the time, and I think contributes a lot to this team. But you want to know who also contributes a lot to this team? A one J.J. Starling. But you wouldn't have known that if you looked at the first half box score. Just 2 points to show for it. He had 20 in the second half. And this has become a pattern. It happened against Miami as well. So my final thought, Alex, is that J.J. Starling needs to start more consistently. You can't have your best player be invisible or non-existent early on in the game, because then there's a good chance that you're trailing and that you have to work from behind, and that's not what you want. You want your best player to start off on the right foot, to play strong out of the gate, so you're not always fighting from behind. It just seems like so many times this season, it's been Syracuse is trailing at the half or trailing late in the second half, and J.J. Starling needs to turn into this superhero to try to get SU back in the ballgame, and it's just not plausible. It's not a recipe for success, and he is a phenomenal player. He has shown really the world that this year, single-handedly keeping Syracuse in ball games, but it's just not sustainable to success. And really, if he wants to elevate his game to the next level, I don't think a scout wants to see, well, this guy didn't do anything for the first 20 minutes of the game. That's not how basketball works, right? It's a 40-minute game, at least at the collegiate level. You need all 40 minutes if you're going to play him that long. You can't have him only productive for half the game. He's J.J. Starling. He's your best player. He should be, I'm not saying he needs 20-point halves every single time out there, but he should, let's say he finishes with 22 points like he did tonight, 11 in the first half, 11 in the second, or some more balanced. I mean, 20 and 2 in each half, that is just not realistic to uphold. J.J. Starling has been such a blessing for Syracuse this year from without him, this team maybe reaches double-digit wins. I don't know. Probably not. But J.J. Starling, you want him to start more consistently, especially because he is your best player, and that's just something that he doesn't have much time to continue working on, but it's not out of the question, and I'd like to see him try.
Yeah, it makes perfect sense. J.J. Starling, the hero act is not exactly winning basketball, and I think part of that is on his teammates. I think a lot of teams are locking in on JJ early, and he has to, pull the rabbit out of the hat in the second half, which is really impressive that he has the capacity to do it, but it's just not the formula for SU.
And that's the thing, right? It's like, it really is pulling a rabbit. It's like, oh, wow, here this guy is going off again on a tangent. He almost seems unstoppable. You just want to see more of that early on.
And sometimes you get the Notre Dame game. Sometimes you get this where it's just a little bit too little too late.
Too little too late it was for Syracuse, falling 88-82 to North Carolina. And that's now 2 straight losses for the Orange, who have a chance to bounce back on Tuesday and maybe exact revenge on the road in what right now is a quad 1 opportunity against Pittsburgh. That game tips off at 7 p.m. with McClurg Remodeling countdown to tip off at 6:30. The double overtime runs until 11 with Nico Horning and Jish Sokolsky. In lacrosse, a tough loss today for SU on the road at Maryland. The Orange are back in the Dome next Saturday to take on currently 17th ranked Harvard. McClurg Remodeling countdown to face-off is at 12:30 before a 1 o'clock start. And some thank yous to hand out. Our producer, Jared Valentin, our engineer, Ryan Bridges, of course our reporter, Austin Barrick, and our desk members, Nick Evans, Josh Radjanov, and Jason Stalakis, all playing a pivotal role in making sure that this show got off the ground. And even though it wasn't a win for Syracuse, definitely had fun here on the double overtime with my partner, Alex Ramol. I'm Skylar Wilkes saying so long, and thanks so much for tuning in.